Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm the chair of the committee. But before we start the meeting, I just make no planned fire alarm test this evening. So if you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point. Or street. Council security staff will be able to direct you. Public toilets are the main reception area. Please switch mobile phone silent whilst meeting. This meeting is being live streamed to the council YouTube channel by the Teams platform. Putting the meeting YouTube included. Members of the public are welcome to proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the council's protocol for available on the other website. Get quicker and quicker each time. Anyway, I don't really want to read out the full protocol statement I made yesterday, but just to remind members that when the chair speaks, other members should be speaking and not interrupt the chair. Members must raise their hands when they speak. Members ask questions on any issue under discussion, and members can make recommendations on. Firstly, apologies. I have received forget. So I think only and Council Manual again will be here. So let's just go around the room. Oh, Councillor Von Wiesler.
Irina von Wiesler, Vice Chair.
You, Councillor Thatcher. Brown.
Brown Southwark.
Chamberlain.
Then Councillor Chamberlain from
Good. Councillor Foster.
Councillor Sam Foster, Faraday Ward.
You, Councillor Deeming.
Councillor Leeming, Dulwich Village Ward.
Rose.
Yeah, Councillor Rose and Dulwich Ward.
Councillor Seaton. Councillor Seaton.
Councillor Martin Seaton, North
Councillor Emmanuel.
Councillor Sabina Emmanuel.
And we have a hat trick of education reps this evening. I'm very pleased to see all three.
Martin
of you.
Brettle, Anglican Diocese of the South.
You.
Marcin Godziński, I am current governor.
Very much. And Councillor Nunes as building. She's a voting member. Right, item 2, notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. There aren't any, but there have been supplemental agenda 1 has been circulated, which is the updated presentation on the contact centre budget pressures from yesterday, which we requested, and have a copy of that. Also, what also has been circulated is the HRA data, the comparator from last year to the slides 3 and 4 that were presented yesterday. Item 3 is disclosure of interest relations. Are there any? Are there any disclosures? So item 4, it's the cabinet consultation with the Overview and Scrutiny budget for 5. Our remit here today is to formulate recommendations to cabinet as part of the budget scrutiny process, following consideration of circulated information on the proposed policy resources strategy for 6 and the cabinet member questions and answer session that was held yesterday. As mentioned earlier, the supplemental agenda contains the additional information requested from Cabinet. I've also handed a paper from Council Lisa in relation to recommendations from health and company. Has everybody got and the educational reps of it? Obviously, we have the list, 9 recommendations here. I propose to do is, see, we divided yesterday's meeting up into about half a dozen segments. I thought perhaps we could take recommendations on segments. That's okay with everybody. Thought I'd probably start with the transformation section, and we come back to the raw. But if we could deal with transformation and then TA, and no, of course, the public funds, contact centre, and the HRA first, and then back. Does that make sense? Are we happy with that? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, you're staring me right in the face. I'm so used to you being there, I think you remember the committee. Sorry, you just like to.
Hi everyone, I'm Councillor Stephanie Crine, I'm Cabinet.
And James, Director.
Thank you. And both of them have kindly agreed to be here, just the questions arising from all the information that's been perhaps we didn't cover before. So without further ado then, if we look at the transformation, Councillor Von Wiese, were there any of your recommendations that touched on the transformation?
Yes, Chair. I think notably our recommendation asks believes that the Council should take advantage of its transformation work to deliver climate change mitigation, e.g. transitioning towards fully electric vehicles and more sustainable working patterns, as well as our recommendation number 3. OSC notes with concern that despite improvements, properties owned by the Council remain vacant and urgent work should be done to ensure are realised. Some of you may recognise that the same recommendation last year. Unfortunately, we believe that it is still relevant.
Take these two for that in, or I don't think the 3 comes under.
It does, but it's part of the presentation we gave you that we're actually doing that as one of the streams of transformation. Okay. So it's sort of asking and recommending something we're already doing as part of transformation. So I mean, I'm happy to have it as a recommendation, but it was in the presentation and it is part of one of those work streams. And then in recommendation 4, sustainable working patterns, again, that's part of that. So those will be covered in strands of work over.
So there's no harm in reiterating. Everybody happy to agree? To recommend that? Sorry.
Favour, the notes we're concerned with the fact that we did look at last year's, and part of the transfer was based on some of your recommendations last year.
Yeah.
That it is being brought through. So I am a little bit concerned about the notes actually. So I wonder whether.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I think we can.
Sorry, as Vice Chair, which so we talked about this is position number 3 and recommendation.
And I'm sorry, on reflection, number 6, us suggest that the Cabinet delivers a report of the impact of changes to care funding in the first year, 3-year budget to consider savings, but lessons could be learned and the impact on vulnerable groups and the.
That's probably under the meeting transformation. So
Okay.
we'll deal with it under.
All right, thank you. So those are transformation sets. 3, which you say doing, and number 4. Thank you.
We're doing both that under that anyway. I think the number is the MTF. Transformation is more corporate rather than deep.
Fine.
Yeah.
So we'll use the terminology strengthen your efforts in this regard, or good. Right. So So transformation, TA, temporary accommodation.
Go through each section.
Yes.
Amendments. Is there opportunity for any of the rest of the committee to say anything else on transformation?
I've still got my head on from
Yeah,
yesterday.
no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry, are there any other recommendations for this section of transformation? Yes. Councillor Rose.
Could I suggest that the committee welcomes the work and the approach that was outlined in relation to transformation going forward, and we understand the requirements to focus on the centre of the council, and we understand and welcome the approach and focus of the areas of work, steps that are being taken, and also ensure that that work comes back to this committee in relation to the questions which I raised about the link between the work and the approach and how it addresses or helps to address budget pressures and service plans going forward. So I just little step back, because this is whilst the transformation work was brought up last year, I feel as though this is a step change in the approach and the centre, and we need that apart, because the distinction was made that this is central corporate approach, but when asked, the information was that as a result of doing that, there would be service and budget benefits. And in that, thanks.
Yes, no, I'm grateful for that. That did cross my mind as well, and I think
For the second day running, Councillor Rose and I are thinking on similar lines. I mean, what I suppose I would want to see is a regular update of the impact of the transformation budget in terms of, that's hard to quantify right now speaking about this, but I'm thinking of some kind of dashboard which tells us, but well, first we need to identify what the key criteria are, and then, or what the SMART targets we have. My observation, having been on this council now for approaching 7 years, is that SMART targets are very hard for a local authority to do. But I think in terms of transformation, we should try and find some SMART targets and report against them, not just to this committee, but in general to our residents as well.
that's a very constructive suggestion. Would you agree with that? Good. Anything else on this? Anything else on the transformation section? No? Okay. So we can move on to temporary accommodation now. Is there anything there? Something on that, Peter?
Yes, we do, Chair. Number 1, OSC recommends that the Council produce an analysis on how the funding regime for the homeless prevention grant will affect Southwark. Share the findings with the government to advocate for greater flexibility around how it is used. Background that I understand this is now 50% and on homelessness. So there is, or on temporary accommodation. So there is a question on, is the council happy with this? And if not, is there something that we can advocate the central government?
So I think we are doing that through London Council. So London Council made a piece of work around TA and the impact it's going to have across London. So I think we are a smaller. So if we were councils doing government are more likely to around that. So it is being done and it is being looked at around that. We still don't know from the final settlement whether there'll be any movement on that flexibility and that ring fencing. It has been fed back not just by London Council, the unitary as well around it. So until we get the final settlement on the week 1st of February, we're not quite sure whether that will move around it. I think it's a valid point, and I do think we do need to. We'll be looking at what that means for us. But it is, I think, London councils are committed to a lot. So I don't know whether we can duplicate what we're doing.
I just want to make a suggestion. We insert then, recommends support of its lobbying with London Council.
Yeah.
Councillor Foster.
It's a general question, I guess, for the committee, which is, I guess, you've identified that the core of this recommendation is sort of about lobbying work, really, about how we advocate for the settlement with government. How should we consider as a committee making recommendations that address the effectiveness of the campaign work? How do we assess whether the council has lobbied effectively or what it would look like to do that? Because I suppose that's kind of what we're calling for. The recommendation around this, a lot of the recommendations so far have been sort of reiterating things that are already being proposed, I suppose, and I think there will be more in that vein. But if we want to ensure that these external efforts to change things are effective, I don't know exactly the best way for the committee to the recommendation aims towards that, although I like the idea in principle because I do think that is key to the issue of temporary accommodation. So, and I don't know if the recommendation does that at this.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, we recognise that it can't be measured in terms of the actual change in legislation because that is partly out of our control, and there are other players involved. But something like best efforts and some proof of the fact that we have engaged with other local authorities potentially. I think we can't really put any deliverables on that.
I think we can request what's been done, intended to be done, sent to us. You. Meeting.
Just add whether or not we want to check with the work that we're doing today, which is the strengthening of the lobbying around the future funding. So we're leading on that as a borough. There's a major bit of work we're doing with other councils. And from our purposes, the direct implication for our budget, we've set out and we understand what the financial implications are in terms of looking at this year's budget. If we get that lobbying work bears fruit and we get either the flexibility out of running. I don't know whether that's the way to knit it together, both to recognise the fact that we are demonstrably doing that lobbying work, but to Councillor Foster's point, how do you measure that in relation to that our budget analysis, and then the Councillor Foster about where in this arena do we monitor and measure this?
Because a change of government policy is a key indicator. Councillor Ryan, did you want to comment on?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of where we are, I suppose obviously where we were looking at, and I think it is a really good. I think though it sort of it can potentially blur the line between what sits within the budget. It's within the greater piece of Grand Council has, and in general. So I absolutely accept that there is a thing in terms of we will apply for consultation, the LGA, we also feed councils, they are the larger bodies. And we will see the results of any of them based on the budget within the final settlement act. We're only a couple of days from that. So in terms of looking at given and around some of those, not just with TA, but things like insurance contributions, the rebate on that will be borne the final settlement. I think the other thing is, I think what is really important going forward, and maybe something for next year, not this year, is the consultation on the multi-year settlement. How that is, how some of the and our feedback and our that consultation looked at and fed into that as well. This year's budget, this year's funding settlement was always this settlement actually supplied councils through until settlement. There's some things in this settlement like the recovery, just a one-off in because it's based on deprivation and council tax base. We're lucky. It is really to see councils deal and settlement. So I accept it, and I think it's a really good value. I do worry that we're looking at setting something 1 year when actually the use our lobbying to try and get what we can.
Just before I council, the submissions that we've made, they go through the cabinet.
No. Oh, what normally happens, they'll come to us to look at. I think we just basically rely, London Council's pulled around that because there's more power within that collective.
So I'm just thinking out loud, but would we have metrics on how effective that has been in terms of our input in this? I mean, I know we've got a new director of communications. I know he's very avid all this thing. So I just wondered, record.
Yeah, we can get that.
Yeah, I think that would be useful to share, and it goes some way because that's some sort of evidence of council.
I think it also goes some way to show, doesn't it, that the effectiveness and rightly of us, of the scrutiny and the scrutiny that you put on us as well, and therefore as a collective committee, I think it then work that you do and you guys are the ones who quite rightly ask us those questions, go back and say, yeah.
That's a new.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the suggestion here produces, OSC recommends the council produces an analysis of how the homeless prevention grant will affect Southwark. So that, we should have anyway. And on the lobbying, so that I think would be really useful for us to look at anyway in this committee. But as far as the lobbying is concerned, I suppose, yeah, in a sense, sort of going along with what Councillor Foster has said, in addition to that, actually, there should be numerous strands of our work on which we are lobbying the government. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with singling out this one, but actually, and numerous strands we should be lobbying government, and numerous strands where, thankfully, I know that we absolutely are lobbying the government and very, very effectively, and that's very clear from all the work that particularly the leader has been doing on council housing, which has been picked up nationally. So I think it's helpful to say that we should be advocating to the government our position, but actually we should be doing that on many, many fronts and not just this one.
It feeds into what Councillor Crine said before about the upcoming consultation and I was going to come back to you anyway.
Thanks, Chair. I'm interested to know that your view that if would it be helpful for this committee to look ahead of the next budget process in an interim way at the progress of the conversations around that medium-term settlement and get an update on how we are pushing for those improvements that we've discussed on various different areas, including this, and hear about the progress, and that'd be useful.
Again, I think it feeds into volunteered anyway.
Was that what you were suggesting? Was that sort of what you?
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
as I always say, I'm willing to. I think what
sure.
Around that. I think it might be helpful to especially when we're leading into the budget process. We tend to do the budget process, and I think we do in Southwark a really. I think our OSC process around the budget is really great, and it is so much more in depth than a lot of other councils because we started quite early. We come to you in November. We come again in January. So there are several sort of meetings that we have where we come to. It might be helpful if we came to you with what the consultation is looking like and what the government were asking as part of the consultation, because I do wonder when we get to this stage, we say about lobbying, given we've got a consultation, I think it'd be really helpful for the committee to know what exactly the government is going to be consulting on and what questions they are going to be asking as part of that consultation, because the thing about government consultations are it's not a sort of blank sheet where we just type in whatever we want to type in, say we think we should do this and we think we should do that, and another thing we think we should do this. they are very prescriptive questions, government consultations, where they ask questions and we fill in those answers around, which does help support, give the direction of travel where we think things are done. But I think it might be helpful for this committee to actually see that as well, so that you see what actually is coming out of central government, but we need to have to around that as well.
Yeah, I guess that's not really a recommendation, but it is, I think, useful in terms of.
I think it's useful
for next year's work.
I think it's useful to put it in just as as a reference. Future discussion. Okay, I noticed 8 and 9 are also TA, aren't they?
They are indeed. Thank you, Chair. So number 8, OSCE recommends that the Council perform additional spot checks on all temporary accommodation to ensure that the Council is achieving value for money and providing appropriate accommodation. This, of course, further to yesterday's discussion, where I understood that checks are carried out routinely only before occupants move in and then only sporadically. So this would be our recommendation. And then number 9, OSCE believes that there should be a review on how, when voids are used for temporary accommodation, to make sure that the Council is accommodating as many people as possible in an appropriate and timely manner.
Just as a point of order, apparently the sound isn't very good on the feed, so when you speak, can you pull the microphone a bit closer to your mouths so that we can hear you? Well,
Shall I repeat?
Right, okay. Councillor Foster, yeah.
I have 2 questions about this. One is the nature of the recommendations we're making. The 8 sounds close to sort of policy than a budget recommendation. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what degree of leeway we're giving ourselves on this, but so I would seek guidance on that. It doesn't necessarily sound like a budget recommendation. And on 9, I'd be interested to know from Councillor Von Visa if you could clarify maybe what the suggestion is in terms of, and maybe the same question applies to that really, whether it's to the budget necessarily, but what the preferred situation with TA is. I'm not sure from the way it's worded if it's essentially saying that more voids should be used for TA or what exactly. Is it calling for more voids, the Council to use additional voids for TA?
On the first point, I'm very happy to be guided by new services. I mean, this does have budget implications, obviously, because there's a cost attached to it, but I'm happy to seek advice on that. On the second point, yes, I think the idea is that if there are voids, do we know whether they could be used for temporary accommodation to relieve the huge cost that we have, and that those are used in as effectively as possible. Obviously, if they are appropriate for temporary accommodation.
Sorry, before we go any further, I'll just pick up the first one. Similar to what we said just before about having that as a reference to refer to later on. I think we'll make recommendations which have specific budgetary implications, but arising from the questioning and the discussions we had yesterday, there may be other things that we can include that's basically an attachment, if you like, say policy-related matters. If the committee is so minded, they don't have to be pure financial recommendations as such. But anyway, Councillor Klein.
Yeah, in terms of number 9, so we do have a policy around voids, and I think the annual letter through as well will include that as well. So we do have targets for using voids, but there's already a policy for that around it. So, and that is being addressed with the annual lettings policy. When that, after we've consulted on that, we'll also have more detail about how voids are being used around that. So that is already in terms of the policy that's already in place on that. In terms of the second one, the spot checks, I'm not saying no to this one. I'm really not, because I think it isn't a budget one. It's really not for me to comment. I suppose though, on all temporary accommodation, you're never going to get all temporary accommodation done, because you'll have residents who just will not want to do that because of vulnerabilities. It's hard, if you look at tenancy checks that we do on tenants, it's very hard getting people in around that. So having it on all, I think, is a really good ambition. I think it's a good ambition, but whether it's practical in the sense, and therefore I do worry, are we inadvertently agreeing to a policy that a recommendation that through no fault of the council's own it can't meet, because it's especially out of borough. If you're looking at out of borough accommodation, how do you do those spot checks around those?
Yeah,
it's only a question, and I'm not saying no to these at all.
I mean, obviously it's a policy issue, but it has financial ramifications because if we're expecting officers to travel to all parts of London and beyond. Then
I'd also say if we are looking at the ring fence prevention, that would be the non-ring fence part, and the non-ring fence like the part we're using to provide the accommodation and pay for accommodation. So it would potentially take money out of that part of it, because it's not prevention, because once somebody is in temporary accommodation, you're past the prevention stage. So if you're tying up, if we're having to use 50% of the homeless prevention grant for prevention, and there's a smaller amount to cover ongoing TA costs, you're taking it out of that pot as well. So as I said, I think it's an admirable recommendation to do. I just wonder how in practice it would work, but that's for you to decide.
Okay, all right. I've got a number of members, so I'll take them in turn the way I've seen them indicate. So, Councillor Seaton next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I was starting this one as your dialoguing, and it's great that Councillor Klein has clarified. I see in the notes, and my notes from yesterday, that the director confirmed, and the cabinet member also confirmed, that up to 50% of voids could be used for TAs. So that's pretty definitive. So therefore, I'm not really sure what the suggested recommendation here adds to what was described yesterday. It's in our papers here. I've just checked on page 103, where there is a clear target to increase the percent of void used as TAs, continue to increase the prevention and use of new placements in TAs, and so on. It's all there. So I'm not sure if this particular recommendation adds to what's in our documents, and whether or not we want to go with, if the document is pretty clear, we're not adding to what's here in the document. I'm not sure the purpose of this recommendation, therefore. And maybe Councillor Convita might want to further clarify.
Yep. Don't worry, I've got her on the list. So let's take Catherine Rose first, please.
Yes, Chair. I think there is something in a combination of these things, and to Councillor Seaton's point around making a clear recommendation around TA. I just also think that 9 and 2, as currently drafted, might be counterintuitive, in the sense of the review of how and when voids are used for temporary accommodation, to ensure that it's using it in an appropriate and timely manner. And the understanding of that with the second point around communications about the disposal of voids. Again, my recollection from yesterday, over and above the targets and the percentage that are currently used, we also had a discussion around the viability of voids and the cost of disposal versus renewal, in order to take families and to place people into them. The void. So there was a clear approach that was set out around the point at which we're better to take the capital receipt for the void, to invest that money into new homes or new accommodation, versus a requirement which could be interpreted in 9 as currently drafted as what you deem to be an appropriate manner and to accommodate as many people as possible, because that it's linked to the work you're doing around the cost of renovating a property and the amount of people you can place in it versus the capital receipt and then what you could build. So I think there was an example given that you could get 2 council home units if you disposed of a void for £1 million, rather than spend £250,000 on renovations, because you'd never get that back in rent because your rent is capped. So I think I understand what you're trying, where we're all trying to get to. It's just I think 2 and 9 is currently positioned might be at odds with each other in terms of the purpose. And I think to Councillor Seaton's point, there is a strategy that's been presented to us that we can measure against, and we can monitor, see what the budget implications are. But I think the other point finally is that often the ability to publish a programme about when and where you'll be disposing of properties, there are 2 restrictions on that. One is that you don't want to inform the market because it might influence the price. If you give a detailed programme of when and where, or you saturate a market with a lot of voids at once, that's not good value. It's not best value for the council. And you release it to the market in a natural way that doesn't alert the market to what you're doing to get the best price. And secondly, sometimes those decisions around the viability about whether you renovate or dispose can't be done in a ongoing way that prevents your ability to publish a programme in advance. Is my potential take on it, but I think there is something around that we need to sort of acknowledge and find a recommendation that allows us to work through that and to hold what the housing department is doing under the lens to make sure it's successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor New.
Thank you. Yeah, acknowledging everything that's all been said. I think, to be frank, recommendation number 2 is simply not a budget recommendation. Communication is always good. I don't have anything sort of per se against it, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with scrutinising the budget. I suppose in relation to, and I think the same is the case for recommendation 8, except as Councillor Cryan has said, actually, in fact, it could have budgetary implications, but they would be negative. But actually, what we're really, and I think, I'm sure everybody here would agree that we're really keen to ensure that we put people in temporary accommodation that is suitable and that it remains suitable. But I would be concerned about the practicalities of achieving that, number 8. And number 9, again, so I am assuming, so yes, my question, I think this in a sense has been asked, but I'm assuming that what we're actually looking for here is to ensure that we maximise the use of voids for temporary accommodation. So, which again, as Councillor Cryan has said, we're already doing, but maybe we should state that as a recommendation that we continue to maximise the use of voids for temporary accommodation. I agree with what Councillor Rose has said in terms of, us sort of not wishing necessarily to tell the entire world what we're going to be selling, where and when and how. I do think, as a ward councillor, it's sometimes useful to be given a nod about properties that are going to be disposed of. And there may be situations where certain parts, certain, streets in our ward, particularly, for example, if a property has been allowed to fall into disrepair and is very expensive, and that's why we are disposing of it, it is often useful to be able to say to people who live in close proximity, who may be asking questions about it, it's often useful to be able to say to them what's going on. But I don't think it's necessary for us to communicate to anybody else, particularly our intentions with regards to a particular property. I can't actually see any benefit to anybody in doing that. So yeah, that's my, but I suppose that relates to point number 2. But as I say, it doesn't seem to me to be anything to do with the budget anyway.
Thank you. I think the borough's estate agents would be happy with that as well, but probably exactly. Councillor Foster. Yeah, I'm going to bring you in because yeah, I know you were before, but what I thought is I'd let members, because they want to ask questions to you, if you see what I mean. I thought it's better that we did it collectively rather than going backwards and forwards. That's all.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to further muddy the waters on this discussion as we sort of retreat from a recommendation or confuse matters. I would be a bit wary of using the word maximise to talk about how we use voids for temporary accommodation, because, of course, when you use the council home for temporary accommodation, it's then not being brought back into use for that its intended purpose. So I think, yes, because are in a crisis with it and the costs are spiralling so much, it is right that we are increasing the percentage of voids we use for TA. But as a general policy, we shouldn't be seeking to use voids. We should be seeking to turn them back into council homes. So I would be a bit wary on that. I think if I would like to see perhaps the recommendation around TA focus on the cost mitigation efforts, and it really ties back into the conversation we had around lobbying. And we had heard yesterday when we discussed this that a big driver of the increase in costs are basically are rent hikes and issues in the broader market that are out of our direct control. There is we did hear that there are mitigations that the council is seeking around working with other councils to try to keep costs down and so on and so forth. And if we are make a recommendation around that, perhaps we can focus on emphasising those efforts to address this situation in the broader market. I think that it is hard to narrow down to something really concrete. I don't think I'm not getting the sense from our conversation around this that we feel that anything in the broad strategy is wrong or should change. But that would be where I would prefer that the focus would be, rather than on increasing our use of voids in that way.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Von Wiesel.
Thank you, Chair. So on number 2, sorry, I didn't read out number 2 because I didn't realize that we were going to discuss this in the context, but you're right. Shall I read it out for the purpose of people who don't have it? Yes, OSC suggests that the Council endeavours to improve communications and engagement around the disposal of council house voids by providing greater clarity and a published programme about when, where and how they will be released to sale. So on that one, in response to Councillor Nunes, I remember that yesterday we did actually discuss it, and I think Councillor King took this actually away as feedback. The idea is not that we detail the exact amount for which a specific property is going to go on the market, but that we have some clarity on the policy around disposal of empty homes, and maybe if there are requests for, the local community will find out, and we've had plenty of examples for that we at least inform those people in the vicinity, and we took this up because it was discussed yesterday. On number 8, so again, this was, I think, further to Councillor Abacha, I think, make the point that there have been quite horrendous cases of overcrowding and completely unsuitable temporary accommodation and some rogue private landlords, and what to do about that. And I agree, there's obviously a privacy issue, etc., but I think actually that it is better to do occasional spot checks within, of course, reasonable cost framework than having cases which are frankly totally unacceptable, where no checks have been carried out for years on these often privately let accommodation. So I do think it is related to the budget, and I do think it is something that the council may want to consider. On number 9, it is probably not perfectly phrased as it is, because the idea, again, is not that we have as many people as possible at any cost. It's also not that we set a target and we have a policy. I know that we have the policy. I know that we have the target. It is in our report. What we want to know is what is the current state of affairs? How many voids are currently used? In other words, how are we delivering against those targets? And how can we ensure that there is some transparency around what happens with empty properties? Again, it just doesn't look good if we have these huge waiting lists and if we have homeless people and right next door, as in our wards, and I'm sure all of your wards, we have an empty council property sitting there for months and sometimes years on end. I think that was the intention behind number 8. And obviously these are policy recommendations, but I think they came directly out of yesterday's conversation and some of your contributions. So, and they have obviously a financial impact. We wanted to just.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm struggling to connect it to this budget that's before us. That's.
Yeah, I suppose if I take each recommendation at times, I start with numerically. So number 2, I think in terms of a published programme, I don't think it's as simple as that, because we will always make a decision based on policy. We can't say in 2 years' time these are the properties we'll deal with in the next 2 years, because we don't have that information. We will look at each property and make an assessment at that time around whether or not we are either going to dispose or do that up. So having a published programme, I think, is up to do. We will always look to see whether the first option will always be to look to see whether it's economical and the finances stack up to actually bring it back into use. That is always the first port of around that. So I think it's really hard in respect of a published programme, because you could go months and months or even years without selling any like buses if you come along at once type of thing around that. In terms of how they're released for sale, actually we normally go through auction sale around those. In terms of communications and engagement, I did say to Councillor Chamberlain, I'll take that, have a little look about how we do that and what the best way to do it. I have to say, I know that there has been one property that has had quite a lot of scrutiny from the public on it. That's not been the case in other parts of the borough. And it isn't just in the North Borough where property being sold. There is a geographical spread around that. So there's been one property where we've had a deputation to Cabinet and to Council Assembly about. I've not heard that noise elsewhere in the borough around it. So again, it's a little bit hit and miss. But again, we will follow whatever recommendations it's going to make. In terms of the recommendation for spot check, we do have a good home standard for temporary accommodation, and I do wonder whether there's more to be said about actually bringing me, but and I don't want to stuff, but whether we sort of bring that to this committee's sort of remit and send that over so you can see what is included within that on there. And then I think in terms of the, and it's a really, I think it's a really good question, Councillor, about that, knowing how many voids are being used, what voids are being used, what type of accommodation is being used for temporary accommodation. Within that, the commitment to an annual lettings plan, that will be driven through that. So that information, once we start the annual lettings plans, will be available. It will be published on an annual basis as well. So there are things in train to actually do that around it. But obviously that's probably for colleagues of mine to look at how that works through. I suppose in the budget thing, I suppose number 8 does make me nervous in the fact that it would be the non-resident part of the budget, which is being used at the moment to buy it to education costs. We'd have to take that out of, and that worries me. It worries me on the fact that then that's less money going into in education costs.
It strikes me that you can take this up. I think in a way, the whole issue of temporary accommodation, I think, needs to come back to us as a separate item in our work plan. In terms of these policy implications, rather than attached to this budget, because I think there's deeper and there's greater issues that are attached to this, and just before us in relation to setting the budget. So, yeah, I'm sort of minded that take this away and we bring it back effectively. I've got Councillor Newton and Councillor Ling.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think, yeah, so I agree with the recommendation. I just think specifically I would be against recommendation number 2, because I see no sense for the council at all to be publishing a programme of when, where and how we're going to release our voids for sale. So I think like black and white, as far as I'm concerned, that is not a suitable recommendation. And I've already spoken on the others, but I think that, yes, it speaks to the fact that we want to know more about policy with regards to the disposal of voids and how that feeds into accommodating the demand for temporary accommodation. We definitely want that information, but I don't agree with the way that that is worded here, and I don't agree that they should be recommendations this budget. With regard to the spot checks, it is my understanding that you said, I think, Councillor Cryan, that the council checks temporary accommodation before it puts residents there. I don't know how long typically residents stay in accommodation, a temporary accommodation, and appreciate that could be longer than any of us would like. But in terms of, as Councillor von Wiese said, residents staying in there for years and no one ever having seen it, I'm assuming that therefore doesn't happen because we've checked before they've gone in. I think one of the discussions that we've had about very, very poor accommodation that some residents in Southwark live in is related to the private rented sector rather than to the temporary accommodation where we place people. So yeah, again, I mean, I think I'm not suggesting by any means that it's a nice to have. But I don't think, again, it's something that is appropriate to include in the recommendation in this in the budget that we have now, for the reasons already said.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Liam.
I appreciate what Councillor von Wiese was trying to achieve when talking about a subset of spot checks. Trying to, and I think, yeah, she's very well intentioned in trying to do more to make sure that we house these vulnerable people in decent accommodation. But I'm not sure that in a pure sampling sense, this approach to a subset actually works. If you're going to choose a subset to try and shed light on the whole, that subset has to be representative of the whole. There has to be criteria identified which show. So that does mean you will have to send officers to faraway places. It means you will have to send officers to see the whole across the range. And also because accommodation tends to be by its nature individual, you might survey 30% of properties and by chance miss the 30% that are awful. So again, I appreciate that it's trying to find a way to make it work, but unfortunately I don't think it does. So I would be opposed to that as well.
I mean, in a way, it touches on a pan-London issue, and it's something really that all local authorities ought to be helping one another out by looking at the private landlords in the borough, rather than having to send 32 London authorities all over London. Sorry, Councillor Liam.
I mean, I did wonder about suggesting that, and I thought, whether we could come to some sort of arrangement with other boroughs, like we'll inspect yours if you inspect ours. On the other hand, I then assumed that actually, we were, because we're an inner London high rental, a high expense borough, it's more likely that we will we'll show you yours or you show us ours, whatever the way that phrase is, might not work because we're more likely to be sending people outside London, out of London, out of Southwark, rather than other authorities sending them to us. But that's my assumption. I could be wrong.
I think you're probably right. Yep, Councillor.
And I think also there is capital letters that's been set up by London councils, which are trying to actually do that centralised procurement of temporary accommodation for its member boroughs. To absolutely the initial intent was to stop councils bidding against each other. So, for example, we might find a temporary accommodation with somebody and say this is what we're best paying, and another borough could say, well, actually, we'll pay more, and then we lose it. So the whole idea about capital letters, which is a London Council's initiative, I was the first chair of that actually many moons ago, is the fact to try and regulate the pricing so it stops that bidding war against boroughs. So therefore, actually, all boroughs get their fair share of that accommodation. It isn't working at the moment, but the sentiment is there to try and do that. I suppose it just, though, to be honest with you, it just takes one borough, doesn't it, to go a little bit, but say, actually, we're not going to be part of that and we'll do it our way. That it's like a house of cards, it then starts to yeah.
They gazump one another.
It is sort of gazumping in a way, yeah.
Councillor Manuel.
In the vein of you show me yours and I will show you mine. If a tenant, if a temporary accommodation user moves into a property and it is in a state whereby there's drunken men and so on and so forth, and it's not in a good state, if they report it, then somebody should visit it straight away in that vein. So therefore, it stops the landlord from continuing to use that kind of mixture in a building.
Yeah, Slim.
I think Councillor Manning might put a finger on it. Actually, is there a mechanism for dealing with Councillor Obviously concerns? Why? But we create an opportunity for self-reporting because the people who are living in those properties are the people who will know best. So if we have a means for self-reporting, a much better mechanism for self-reporting, that might address Councillor Obviously concerns.
Obviously, it's not a budget question, so it's not finance.
Yes, I've been reminded that we're veering off what we should be considering.
There is a letting standard for anyone that we do a temporary accommodation from up to, which we passed a few years ago around that, which is around that. But I think in terms of the questions in terms of budget, it's not within the budget remit for us.
Which is what I was suggesting.
And I don't want to step on toes of colleagues who have more level of detail on this than I do. I'm only speaking some historical detail from when I.
Yeah. No, I know the feeling, Stephanie. I was there before. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was going to suggest that perhaps this is something that we park and bring if the committee looks at it, or indeed if the Housing Security Commission looks at it as well. This might be a discussion that could be taken up there. I think in terms of what we could recommend this evening, obviously the conversations we had yesterday, the agenda that we had was structured around areas of overspend that we were looking at, and so it seems sort of natural that our recommendations would focus on addressing that, since we mainly talked about areas where there was overspend and the mitigations that were taken around those. So I wanted to suggest something in that vein on temporary accommodation. Something that did come up that Councillor Brown had mentioned was the issue of rent controls. Without wanting to assert a position from this committee on that, it might be something that we would ask that Southwark takes to London councils to discuss about whether that should form part of the advocacy work in this area, particularly, I mean, maybe more broadly, but certainly in this sector where we've seen this explosion of costs, where the market dynamics are seeing huge rent increases for landlords and huge pressures on local government, which is a transfer of money out of the pockets of the public into landlords who are benefiting from a homelessness crisis. So it's obviously an appalling situation on an ethical level, but in a practical level, we've seen that that is what's driving those costs of these dynamics. I know we heard from the strategic director for housing yesterday about concerns around if you clamp down on rents, would that just drive more people out of the market? Well, that's a question to be worked through. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that is an impediment to the policy, but regardless, I think as it is that issue is at the core of this problem, as well as the demand, but obviously the rents are also a big issue. So perhaps we could recommend that it's something that Southwark takes into those discussions with London councils around that collective work across London about what they are pushing for and how they address this problem collectively.
No, that's a good idea. I mean, it's an option for them to consider the string to their bow in argument. You have anything to say on that?
I think the issue around London Council, 32 boroughs of certain political colour there, they won't go. We know they won't go for it, which then would. I think the principle of it is fine. I suppose then the issue is then on London.
I think that pressure should be brought to bear on.
Yeah, I think the argument should be made.
Argument. There is an argument to be made.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that argument is not within our gift.
Absolutely. No, I think as Councillor Foster indicated, it's something for us to take to London Council. So on that basis, then, I think two things on temporary accommodation. One is what Councillor Foster's just proposed, and then the other is that we come back with a separate item on the work programme in relation to accommodation. Agree with that?
Yes, I think that would be good if we can.
Oh well, I'm sure we can call another meeting. You know,
It can go to housing as well.
and
people feel like they're going to miss out.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else on temporary accommodation anybody wants to raise before we move on? No. Very much.
Sorry, are we lobbying for rent controls on temporary accommodation or?
I think across the piece. I think
There isn't a distinction. You can't distinguish between the two. So are we clear that you're asking officers to lobby London Council for rent controls across London?
As an option, yes, that's.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I think is that a recommendation we are making now, or was this just a suggestion? Because I think that would be served. Or was it
was a proposal, wasn't it? Do you want to restate your proposal, Councillor Foster? So
yeah. So essentially, there are ongoing collective efforts across London councils to address not just in terms of how their own policies within the borough, but also the market itself. There are in yesterday's presentation, we heard about the Pan-London Agreement to control costs, and I think that it's logical, given the nature of what's driving the issue, for there to be a discussion within London councils about coming to a position around controlling rents. So that is the recommendation. It is obviously broader than temporary accommodation. If that, it's a broader issue than that. But I think it's a very logical thing to do. The problem of spiraling rents is not limited to temporary accommodation, even if our conversation is. But I think that it's in a way a strange thing to be absent from the conversation within London councils, given that it is so directly pertinent to the problem.
Thank you, Councillor Crine.
I think if you do that, then I think you have to sort of stipulate that it's a political discussion. It wouldn't be an officer discussion, and be mindful of the fact that the minister has so far said no to rent control.
Thank you.
To be a political, it needs. I think the wording needs to be that it's taken to the leaders rather than officers, because it is a political ask rather than a.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to join with Councillor Quine on your last statement. I completely agree. It is a political discussion. And with your permission, Chair, if I can refer back to the recommendation and indeed what's in the paper, and on page 103, where the mitigation is highlighted by officers for 25-26 as being a better a basis for us formulating recommendation, possibly. That is that it says here on the 25-26 increased number of council void to be used for STA. We agreed that it would be up to 50%. Implement new housing allocation scheme which will strengthen moved on option to prevent homelessness and presenting for TRA. So that's another interesting area for recommendation. But I want to particularly move on, and that is of course on housing benefits. Chair, because that appears to be the disjunction at the moment for London and particularly South East, the cost of housing and rentals versus the rest of the country. Yes, it is a political discussion, obviously, but it's definitely financial. And I'm now coming up with a recommendation that how we as a council are lobbying. I know that Councillor Quine made reference to it yesterday, but further clarification, what efforts are being made and how can we contribute to efforts. So I'd like to put forward, therefore, that that the council continues to lobby central government to consider the true cost of housing, private housing in London and the impact it has on our budget, and therefore seek that central government recognises the difference of cost of living in London versus Manchester or Liverpool. That's the recommendation, sir.
Okay, they're coming flood now. Councillor Von Wiese.
Firstly, I have a lot of sympathy for that letter recommendation by Councillor Seaton. I think that it's very worthwhile taking forward. I also have a lot of sympathy for the idea that we need to talk about rent control. Personally, I think that's a very worthwhile discussion, but I do agree with Councillor Crine that this is far beyond our pay grade right here, and it's something that we need to have a proper discussion and probably bring to assembly, and in order to get some some impact assessment and a proper economic assessment as well before we decide that we want to take that as a position.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think Councillor Foster was saying that. He can speak for himself, obviously, but I think what he was suggesting is it's an option for the council to take up in its deliberations with London councils, not necessarily supporting it or backing it, but throwing it in the mix of the options for them to consider. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. I mean, it is a political conversation. I think that, yes, there are distinctions between things that are more operational and things that are more political. Absolutely. It is a political issue, of course. The actions that councils take collectively to address it are political in nature. So I don't think that it is outside of the remit of this conversation at all. It's a very practical question, isn't it? That we are seeing this issue around rising rents as the major factor in the last 2 years or so, or however it is, the major factor causing this pan-London, well, not just London, but crisis around this cost that is driving councils to the brink of bankruptcy. So I do think that it's very reasonable for it to be part of our conversations that we're having with other councils around we address it. I'm comfortable that people don't want to go in two-footed calling for a particular policy around rent controls, but I do think that it's a reasonable thing that we say take it away to London councils, have those conversations.
Mine was more around Councillor Seaton's recommendations strengthening that, so I'll come back to
Did you want to say something?
Only that I think that is absolutely fine, but maybe Councillor Seaton's suggestion should be a first step to assess really how London is affected more than others and what the real true cost of renting is, because then maybe we can make a stronger argument for or against rent control.
I don't see them.
Can I clarify, Councillor Seaton, were you suggesting something instead of that, or were you suggesting a complementary recommendation alongside it?
The microphone, Martin.
The rationale for rent control, particularly here in London, is that there is a dearth of affordable homes here. Consequently, the private sector are operating on the basis of hubris, profit, and therefore forcing people out of London with unaffordable. Therefore, if there's not a strategy in this part of the country on rent controls, the situation will only get worse. And the descriptions of created yesterday that it's not affordable, it's not sustainable, will come to pass. So the initial step is, first of all, housing benefits. Is that an initial stopgap? And I'm interested to hear what Councillor Quine got to say in relation to housing benefits. And that's the first problem we have, that the housing benefit goes up to, I believe, 22,000 a year. Yeah, 22,000 a year. And here in London, that's a figure that is clearly not affordable. And therefore we are already at a disadvantage. Our schools are closing, but of course families, like my own son's family, are moving out of London because it's not affordable. And you gain better value for money elsewhere. And that, therefore, in the long run, if we don't arrest this decline in population in London of those who are on older incomes, London will suffer.
I just want to bring us back to the budget.
And I think what that sort of said, I see. So the work we're doing, and some of the work that's been done with Scrutiny Future Council Housing, and work that councils are advocating across the country, is to bring the temporary accommodation rate to 90% of current local housing allowance rates. It's currently set at the rates in 2011. By doing that, you're going to get actually a better outcome for people in temporary accommodation. That is already something that local government association are lobbying for. London councils are. It's in our Secure Future Council Housing, and I do wonder whether that sort of strengthens the recommendation from Councillor Seaton on doing something that's already there and is already being lobbied for around that, and that uplift that the LHA, the 90% is set at current rates, not rates from sort of 14 years ago, to take into account cost of living and increased costs within London as well. So it's sort of basically saying yes, that I think Councillor Seaton shouldn't be saying, because I'm not on yours committee, but it would strengthen that recommendation.
Okay.
Where I'm coming from that one.
Yes, you want to take that on board. Yeah. So are we clear on Councillor Seaton's motion? Yeah. Is that agreed?
So are we having votes, it sounds like?
I was going to do them, yeah.
One at a time?
They're complementary.
Complementary? All right, okay.
So we'll deal with Councillor Seaton's first. Nobody's happy with that. And Councillor Foster's recommendation? No, as a complement to Councillor Seaton's. Yes, we're being very complimentary this evening. Okay, there we go. Right, where are we now? Where's my place? Oh, yes, sorry, yeah. No recourse to public funds. Did you have anything on that, Councillor Von Riester? No? I don't think so. There was nothing, no. Anybody, anything they would like to recommend in relation to no recourse to public funds? Would you like us to recommend anything, Councillor Klein?
I think obviously the light touch review that Councillor Ali spoke about has recommendations in there that will be implemented and will help support around those costs. I think, yeah, on that. So there is work being done by Councillor Ali and her team to try and sort of get those better outcomes for people who are no recourse public funds. I think it just really is based on we just need to make sure that decisions are made on leave to remain as timely as possible. That again is outside of our control as a council, but it's continued to support. But we recognise that it will, for the time being, foreseeable future, be a bit of a pressure.
Okay, so I noticed it. Recommendation 6 bear on that.
Sorry. Not directly. I think specifically on no recourse to public funds, we spoke yesterday about lobbying the government on two fronts. One is to lift the ban on for asylum seekers to work, and the second one, from memory, was on the list of jobs that they can do once they are allowed to work, and to scrap that list. And I think you said in response, or Councillor Ali said in response, that this was something that is already underway. And therefore we didn't take it up as an explicit point, but I do think it is important that central government tackles these issues as quickly as possible.
Yeah, sure, but it's not a budgetary.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. All right. Okay.
I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah. Another thing to lobby on. Let's move on to the contact centre, please. Now, you've had this other document circulated with the additional information that we requested yesterday. Don't know if anybody did you have a recommendation on the contact centre? No, okay, fine. Anybody want to raise anything on the contact centre? No? Yes.
Just to see whether or not it might be linked to transformation and coming back, and whether we could just also make reference to it, because whilst in terms of a budgetary pressure, it wasn't a lot of money, we thought it had value in coming to this committee because of the impact across key departments that were causing significant budget pressures. So there was a strategic benefit in making sure that this work or the aspirations around the customer engagement strategy was done and successful, and what good looks like and what the implications are to the budgets of the departments, where it was clear from previous presentations that communication and cost around communication and jobs were creating exacerbating pressures across housing in particular.
I said yesterday, we are the customer access strategy, which incorporates the contact centre as well, is being refreshed and coming to cabinet in June. As I said, yes, I'm happy to bring that here, whether you want to do it as a bit of pre-scrutiny or post-scrutiny. I don't mind which, but more than happy if, when you're looking at your work streams for the 25-26 year, if you want to add that as an item, as I said, yes, I'm happy to bring that to this committee. Yeah.
Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Just since we're discussing it and we have a bit additional, we have the numbers on it and everything. Could I just check with you how this overspend works with? We sort of touched on this. I just want to fully understand how the overspend works with the callbacks. So the table that we've got now outlines that the bulk of the overspend is to do with 10 callback staff. So is it essentially that there are people on temporary contracts or contractors who are brought in specifically to call people back, or how does that work?
Yes, effectively. We could provide more detail if you want a fuller answer, but yes, effectively we had to bring on 10 additional staff to do callbacks, specifically, largely relating to repairs and maintenance.
So there's like an internal approach which says we had decided to do XYZ number of callbacks. In order to manage that extra capacity, we need to take on additional staff. That is not budgeted for. Then that results in the overspend, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's done on the fact that the options are either you don't do that and actually people are holding on and waiting for it. And so in terms of the resident, our residents should always be at the forefront of everything that we do. In terms of a resident calling us, we do not want them hanging on the phone while operatives, contact centre workers are trying to get in touch with maybe somebody in repairs to find out what's happening. So that we took the decision to do that callback. The idea being that as the repairs improvement plan embeds more and more, and the right first time increases, and the productivity increase in terms of jobs, that actually that resource is no longer needed. And that's why it's done on temporary staff rather than permanent staff. Around that, the idea that you get to a stage where actually you've got very few, if any, callbacks, and it can be managed within the current staffing. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Can I just ask one follow-up question, and then I'll come to your recommendation? Well, how long have we been taking this approach of taking on temporary staff to do callbacks?
About 18 months. It's one of the things when I came into this portfolio in 2022 and we were looking at contact, I was trying to understand why, some of the lengths of call times and that were, and it was fed back to me on that. And then when we were looking at delivering on the repairs improvement plan, linking it in as part of the repairs improvement plan to reduce that down. So it has been, we have seen the volume of callbacks go down. It has started to go down around it. So it is not at the level it was 18 months ago, around that. But I think the option is we either do that or we, ask residents to hold on while we try and get it done. And I don't think that's acceptable. I really don't think that's acceptable. I'd rather we call people back and say. Because people hang up and they're frustrated and
For sure.
yeah.
I mean, essentially, it's about capacity, and the question of a temporary or permanent staff
Yeah.
aside, we're essentially
But-
investing greater resource in the call
We
centre in order to reduce call
but I
times.
think the contact. So I sort of think the contact centre in a bit of a way is a bit of a red herring. And actually, what we need to do is look at the actual end-to-end repair service, and as that proves it, because the contact centre is the first port of contact for so many people, but it's also not the first point of contact because they've already contacted chasing up. It shouldn't really be for chasers. It should really be for that first point of contact. So the contact centre isn't causing the additionality that's needed. It's the actual end-to-end repair service. So it's a little bit of a red herring to say it's the contact centre sort of doing this. It's other parts of the council and other parts of the service that are building the pressure within it. As I said, we are seeing improvements in it. I think there are things that are being done through the HRA recovery plan around increasing productivity, around that in terms of numbers of jobs done, right first time, around that, which will then have a positive impact on.
Can I suggest that we recommend that the funding for callbacks, I think, well, basically the slide it says funding for callbacks will remain until such time as the volume of repairs outstanding reduces, but there is no actual funding for it because it's overspent, so it's not in the budget. So why don't we recommend that it be budgeted for, and then if it doesn't need to be used because the repairs improves such that those staff are not required, great. But I just think it seems somewhat illogical to have a sort of approach which is working and helps reduce call times, but that is not budgeted for, but that we are also saying we will continue to do. So why don't we just budget for it? Okay.
Just a couple of things on that. That part of that would have to come from the HRA. So when we'd have to relook at the HRA.
But it already is, isn't it? I mean, it's an overspend already.
No, it's within the general fund. So we've been doing, so the HRA bit, it's split between general fund. Part is general fund, part's HRA. If we do make that saving from the general fund, then there has to be, if we say we're going to put more into this from the general fund, there has to be a corresponding saving in the general fund to make the budget balance, because otherwise you haven't got a balanced budget. So what I would only push back on that for this financial year is to say, where would that saving come from? And I think it's a little bit late in the budget process for us to go through that process to look within the organisation of where that saving would be around it.
The money is being spent. So where is the how is the overspend?
Departmental reserves.
Okay, the money is coming out of reserves.
Yeah.
Well,
Reserves. So it's departmental reserves, which each department's got a set of reserves to, and because it is not in the scheme, I mean, it is an overspend, but if you look at things like TA and NRPF, it's not to that extent. The actual departmental reserves are covering it and more around it. My worry is if we say let's budget more for it, then I'm going to have to find a corresponding saving somewhere.
I suppose. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I don't want to get too. But anyway, there is, if I can put it this way, there is provision in the budget through the contingency fund, which is in each department. So in other words, it's not a seating reserve; it's a proper reserve where you've actually got this sort of inbuilt in the budget anyway that you can draw upon for these type of situations when they accrue during the year. So in that sense, technically, it's already budgeted for, but it's because it's a draw on reserves, it's portrayed as an overspend, but actually it's still contained within the budget. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think it isn't sort of logical, really, but I'm happy with Councillor Klein's argument in the sense that it causes other issues and it's a relatively small sum. So I'm happy to stand down on that point.
We're acutely aware of it. We're looking, obviously, the customer access strategy will help support you. But we're also really acutely aware that, as I said, as that repairs improve and continues to embed, it will bring, and those numbers are coming down. We're seeing those numbers come down. So I'm confident that at some point will be minimal. And actually, do you need temporary stuff? It could probably be within the existing. around there. We're on a journey on it, but the good thing about it is we are seeing it reduce. So that looks like it's working. By which case, you know, in terms of that cost of temporary staff, you may not need so many temporary staff. So it is covering the kids, and so I'm not as worried about this one as obviously I am.
I mean, we're anticipating that it will be a time-limited pressure. We're not expecting this to go on forever. Therefore, we're comfortable funding it from reserves for a year or two. If it becomes year after year after year, clearly we need to look at baseline in the budget.
Okay. Well, here, Councillor Seaton, you're next.
Chair, I wonder if you could humour me for a moment or two and return to the no recourse of public funds. And I know we passed it without making a recommendation, but I'm conscious that, and maybe officers can lead me appropriately, that there is a set of recommendations here which we have not formally acknowledged, first of all, as a committee, and but there was a fourth or fifth bullet point down. I note here on automation, streamline processes to improve efficiency and reduce errors. That clearly is incredibly important, particularly in this area, because of the unknown liability we're taking on anyway. That this committee supports the recommendation and particularly would like to see the streamlining of processes to improve efficiency and reduce errors be a priority for the forthcoming year. Maybe using similar words, if that's okay with you, Chair, and the rest of the committee.
Pretty clear what Councillor Seaton. Emmanuel, no? What do you want to repeat that one?
You've got the paper in front.
I just want to know if that recommendation includes, if that recommendation includes the embedded office.
So there's a light touch review that was carried out with a series of recommendations. I think the recommendation Councillor Seaton is referring to is one around the actual process for applications and streamlining that process so that quicker outcomes are given. It is the embedded officer one was a separate recommendation on its own. And I think Councillor Ali yesterday was quite clear about where she's going on that one.
Yeah, okay. Well, can we deal with this now? Because obviously I don't want to keep going backwards and forwards. Can get on this point?
So I just wanted to ask where the recommendations are. Which do you have a page number for the recommendations?
1-1. No, I'm saying sorry for keeping you waiting. I've no idea. I don't think Councillor Seaton was recommending we agree all the recommendations. He was just itemising one. Fourth bullet.
Fourth, is it? Oh, thank you, you can count. The processes to improve efficiency and reduce errors. Now, we would support this particular recommendation and we'd like to monitor it over the next 12 months. And that's clearly an important area for concern.
Okay, you agree with that? Yes? Thank you. Anything else on no recourse to public funds before I move back to where we were? No? Okay, jolly good. Where was I? Councillor Brown.
Chair. Gosh, that's thrown me a bit. So going back to the contact centre, I guess I'm kind of wondering about the point you made, Councillor Cryan, around it being a bit of a red herring. And I appreciate what you're saying, but I can't help but wonder whether there's been a real effort made, and I'm sure there has, but it'd be good to know, towards other efficiencies that can be found within the contact centre itself. And, you know, there's a couple of things that have been discussed in my ward and actually brought to the Housing Scrutiny Commission too, around where there are communal repairs issues, for example, a designated contact within a block, or perhaps somebody who's on a TRA is able to make that report on behalf of everyone who is experiencing the issue. And I imagine if that was to happen across every single estate across the borough, we'd make efficiencies. So there's that, but also a lot of what I hear from residents around their experience of the contact centre is that when they speak with someone different, and perhaps that's somebody from this callback team, the call is a lot longer because they're then having to repeat the same issue. That person doesn't understand what was said before. So I guess I just can't help but feel that there are other efficiencies to be made within the service anyway. And so it'd be great to hear your view on that. And just reassure me that those have also been looked at.
There is a number that TRA chairs or TRA members can call. There is a helpline number for TRAs in terms of things like communal outages or around that. So that has been given to all TRAs. And if it hasn't, we can do that round. It's also the same one councillors can call as well around that. So that has already, and that's been in place ever since I've been a councillor actually around that. So there is that around it. I think in terms of the callback, the people who are calling back are the dedicated callback people rather than the people who make it initially. Some of the reasons why, especially in terms of communal heating, it takes a while to get back to them is because obviously they're not in-house services. So we have to get back to either Smith or Byford or OCS and get those replies from them and then pass that back. So that's passed back on to the repair service, which is passed back on to the contact centre. In terms of efficiencies, if are you talking about efficiencies that result in budgetary savings, or are you talking about the efficiency of the actual service itself? Because I think they're two different things. I wasn't quite sure, and I think you're more veering on the efficiency of the service, which would
the service, because I would question the need for 10.
Yeah,
so
it's not budget. So that is what we're looking at as part of the customer access strategy as well around it. But the strategy we have at the moment is due to expire this year anyway. But I think the strategy we have at the moment is not an evolving document, and I've said quite clearly that the customer access strategy has to really sort of mirror the same sort of process of the digital strategy, but is something that evolves as things evolve rather than being a static policy that is just there. And it may have been fine for when it was first agreed, but it needs to evolve with it. So I think in terms of it, because of efficiency, I look at from a finance perspective, which are we will save money here by re-looking at a service. If you're looking at the efficiencies in terms of what can that centre do as part, but that's really what comes from. Is what we're looking at. But in terms of the TRAs, there is a number, and I will get that circulated to all councillors so that you can circulate it to your TRAs.
That would be great, and I appreciate that response. I think we have to have a lot of faith that what you're saying is right, that in several months' time those staff won't be needed. But of course, if they are, then it becomes.
So I said it's probably a couple of years rather than months.
You said years.
Yeah, it'd be, it's on 18 months. We've got to wait for it through, but we wouldn't formalise it in the budget because then that becomes a revenue stream, and there will be a point where it's not needed.
Sure.
As I said, always guided by this committee, but if you wanted chair or committee to look at that as a bit of pre-scrutiny on the customer access strategy,
yes,
happy to do that rather than after the event.
Yeah, I think we will.
Yeah.
I mean, she said similar to the digital strategy, it'd be important to get that in.
Yeah. And I think it'd be really helpful for us to have that pre-scrutiny done on that, because then it helps recommendations from this committee will help shape that policy itself.
Thank you. And your first point around the TRA number, I think is great, but a lot of the TRAs I speak to don't know about it. We're always making recommendations about comms at this committee, and similarly, I would say, which is even more of a problem, contact centre staff also sometimes don't know about that either. And I wonder, particularly if you've got a third party staff who are on that callback team, is that message communicated to them? Because in my experience, residents are telling them that, and then they're saying, no, everybody in that block has to report. So I thought I'd share that.
I think we set the TRA number was set up on the fact that if it was reported for a TRA, I think that the TRA chairs or secretaries or a member of TRA would know that it is a communal problem rather than just one household specific, and that's why that number was set up. Yeah, it's the same number that we.
Yeah, good. What's the news?
I apologise, Chair. I was not going to come back on the contact centre issue. I was a bit confused because we popped from that to from the NRPF, and actually I wanted. I'm a little bit confused, so I would be grateful if you could clarify exactly where we are and whether we can still come back on the NRPF.
I did want, as I said at the beginning, I wanted to take each of these sections in turn. Unfortunately, Councillor Seaton took us back to the previous section. It wasn't my intent to go back to the previous section, but he did quite rightly, and to be fair, he did indicate that there were recommendations that were part of the slides we saw yesterday presented by Councillor Ali, and Councillor Seaton picked one of them. Go back if you so wish, if you wanted to look at the agree one of those other recommendations.
Thank you for your forbearance, Chair. I suppose, I mean, to be clear, like sort of the reason we didn't discuss this in that section was because no one had raised this. So now it has been raised, and I feel like, hey, what was that? That's why I'm coming back to it. But to be perfectly honest, I don't know what the purpose of these recommendations are on this slide. The fact is that somebody's already recommended them, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether we as a committee now need to recommend them as well. But specifically, if we're talking about automation, streamline processes to improve efficiency and reduce errors, to be perfectly frank, I've absolutely no idea what that means. It doesn't seem to me to be specific. Obviously, it's a great idea, probably in absolutely everything we do across the council, to streamline processes, improve efficiency and reduce errors. But I don't really see that as a recommend. I mean, you know, forgive me, I don't want to be cynical, but I mean, honestly, if that was what councillors, I mean, if that was what Councillor Season's recommendation was, then I mean, that's fine, except I just think it's so ludicrously general that I don't really know what it's for.
Yeah, okay. Just for clarity's sake, so when Councillor Ali presented this yesterday, she presented the review findings as the previous slide there on 10, and the key recommendations on 111. Were they the recommendations coming out of those findings? Right. So they're not recommendations necessarily for this committee. They were recommendations that were presented to the cabinet member. So they're not recommendations for this committee as such. But feel free to move as Councillor Seaton did, as we've agreed. Recommendation. You know? Yes, we did. So yeah. Okay. So can we move them back to the call centre? Anything on that? No? On that? Okay. HRA is the next one. Had the additional information in terms of the comparator with the previous year. I've just got one question just in relation to that. Home ownership exchequer services insurance gone up by 50% a year. That seems quite a large increase.
Yeah, so what's happened is that it used to be Zurich. A lot of the large insurance companies and the sort of the main insurance companies post Grenfell pulled out of block housing insurance, moved away from it. So when we went out to tender to those companies, nobody wanted to take it. It meant then we had to go out to the private market, and because we have to have buildings insurance, it's a legal requirement around that, and therefore, because the sort of standard insurers are no longer doing block insurance, it's not just for Southwark, it's the same for all councils, housing associations as well, all social housing providers. We had to go to private market, and by definition of that, they do charge 5%. And it's a charge that under leasehold and under Section 20 legislation is full cost recovery is rechargeable to leaseholders. So that's why.
Okay. That explanation. Councillor Seaton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I must say, I've taken a while to study this to understand it. It has generated many questions, but I'm restraining myself, of course, Chair. I did want to focus on, if I may, the most popular one in my ward, particularly in the northern part of my ward, and that's of course service charges. The service charge percentage increase is significant. It is significant, and I'm not sure how we tackle it here at OSC. It's not a. It's clearly we're recovering costs, obviously, but it is a significant change in the service charge between 2023 to 24. Forgive me, if those of you who've got page 2, 2/3 the way down the page. As a percentage, I'm calculating that to be around what, about 20%, 25%. These figures are astonishing. As I said, it's generated far more questions than we can handle here. In fact, I really want to keep quiet, really, but maybe we should handle it outside this meeting, because these figures have generated far too many questions, insights, which will take up too much of his time. So I'm just note the tenant service charges, the difference in the cost are significant. There isn't any evidence to why they've increased to this degree, because we've long past the years which it could have been related to energy, which was the initial surge in service charge I recognise. Why these percentage differences today?
Yeah, so there's a narrative
Okay.
around it. So it's basically, this is the service charges for cleaning, grounds rent, state lighting, and that takes into account the increased recharge to the HRA from environment around that. It covers the increase in cost of that. So we have to rebase service charges to make sure that what comes out the HRA and what the HRA is charged, because it's proportionate to around that. Actually, as you know, the HRA has to balance, so therefore what the HRA pays, the HRA has to get back in around that. And it is literally the cost. It's things around the pay increases for the staff. It's the HRA apportionment of that. It's around, sort of inflation costs that have happened since the mini budget around on that. So it's really just the actual recouping the costs, as we've always done. It's just we've seen increases in what the HRA is being charged back on the portion of the cleaning service that it uses, the grounds estate relighting that it uses. It's not over and above anything. We're not charging tenants more than it costs. It again, it's part of what we've always. The HRA does pay the general fund that money. Given where we are in the HRA, we do need that full cost. We always have gone for charge it.
If I may, Chair? Yeah. Thank you. I've accepted the narrative behind as to why the cost increase is this significant between a single year, which is, of course, why we need to query it. If the percentage increase is way above inflation, in fact, it's way above most costs that I recognise. And notwithstanding what you said, you've got 100% recovery. I accept that. But the earlier recommendation in terms of efficiency and so on applies here as well. Are we giving our tenants therefore good value for money? These cost increases significant as a percentage. These are significant percentage increases. And notwithstanding what you've described, 100% recovery, I accept that, but it's simply these are significant changes, year-end changes. And if this percent increase were to occur over a 4-year period, it would have almost 100% increase. And that's impossible in reality. So there's clearly the narrative of these costs, these charges need to be better understood by either this committee or housing maybe, but as I said, this entire sheet has generated so many other questions I could raise, but that one I particularly focus on because like in many places, we've all had our tenants who are paying service charges query these figures, and I've got a particular tenant who is very often querying these figures, and for good reason, I might add. I'm not sure how to handle this one, Chair. I'm happy to be guided by yourself or the cabinet member or officers here as to. I'm not expecting a detailed response to why there's a difference in the percentage charges right now, but some rationale to explain how it's possible that this percentage increase, which is around a third, it's a significant change. Under normal circumstances, we would have to look at ourselves and understand, are we offering good value for money?
There is more detail in the HRA rent setting report that went to Cabinet earlier this month around that. It does give a lot more meat on the bones around that. The bulk of it is through the pay increment, which, as you know, as a council, we don't set the pay increment. That's done through collective bargaining with the Joint National Committee and the unions themselves around that, the pay settlement that has come in around that. So we have to factor that into those charges. As I said, we're not actually making any money off that. It absolutely is repaying the HRA apportionment to those costs around it. But the bulk of the increase has come from the pay settlement and the pay increases. Inflation has been high recently, and therefore pay increases and pay awards have been corresponding within that as well. On that, if we didn't do a sort of 100% cost analysis, we would need to relook at the HRA recovery plan. We would need to look where additional savings within the HRA would be around that as well. So this isn't anything that we haven't done in previous years. It's not a new way of funding the HRA. It's always been that we get billed by the HRA gets billed by the general fund, and
but it's the first time we've really looked at this. So obviously I can understand why Councillor Seaton will raise these questions. Councillor Foster.
I have a really basic and probably ignorant question, where comparing making a recommendation around the HRA to making a general fund one, where we're looking at the general fund areas and you can sort of make judgments about, oh, perhaps this budgetary decision should be taken differently and that should be funded through reserves or whatever it may be. But then the HRA has to have the income matched to expenditure. I guess it's hard for me to kind of get my head around how you can make a decision to change one thing or another. I don't know exactly how to put the question, but you know what I mean? Like there is a degree of kind of artifice in the fact that the expenditure and the income are exactly the same because they have to be, or at least I suppose that it could generate more income than it has expenditure, but obviously the pressures are in the other direction. So it's sort of hard for me to understand, looking at it from a budget recommendation perspective. You can't sort of look at a line and say, well, perhaps this should be invested in more heavily or whatever it may be, because just given that is the type of conversation we're having, you can obviously have policy discussions in other areas about how they should do things differently within housing. But I don't know. Could you maybe shed some, I mean,
it's the same in the general fund of the HRA. Both of them have to balance to nil. So there's an equal and opposite reaction to anything you propose. But I don't think the onus is on you to necessarily propose the solution to any problem that you create by your recommendation. So I think members on the committee are free to recommend that Cabinet and Councillor Crine and the leader may wish to make a particular adjustment to a line, and that they might seek to fund that in other ways through reducing spend in another area. So I don't think you're limited.
All right. Maybe I'm just thrown by how this present, the balloons have, they've turned into boxes. Maybe it's throwing me a little bit. Yeah. All right.
Because we haven't, this committee, hasn't really considered this before. This is our first outing, if you like, on getting more detail on the figures behind the HRA. I still think there's a body of work to be done on the HRA, which teases out more along the lines that you're suggesting. And it's not for this meeting now, but I do think whether it's this committee or a subgroup or the housing scrutiny. The thing is, we're all time precious, and I'm not one for creating committee for the sake of creating committee. But I do think, though, given Councillor Seaton and other councillors' experience through their casework, it's something that we do need to drill down on a bit more. It's one thing saying, oh yes, it's the pay increase and we've got no control over that, but then you have to consider, well, how many people have we got doing X, Y, Z, which is costing us more than if they were doing ABC. So, so there are hidden questions that we need to drill down on.
Information. I would thank the officer for presenting this paper, though. Just for the record.
So I think it's something we take away, and we come back with a. Right. Anything more on the HRA? Can we move on? The capital budget, we never really asked any questions.
After this committee asking many times to bring the capital programme to you, and then maybe I just basically answered all your questions in my my preamble to it, but but you had no questions.
Yeah. Councillor Seaton's got 6 recommendations.
Yeah, I can imagine, but no, but yeah.
Councillor Rowe.
Just on that point, then, if you really would like a question, although we didn't ask any specific questions around the capital programme yesterday, it would be good to know and understand how work has progressed within the council to ensure that all staff related and other costs that can be capitalised against project work and the delivery of particular schemes is progressing. So there was a long-standing, or there is a long-standing point around ensuring that capitalisation for fixed-term projects and that related staff costs are included in the capital programme to release the pressure and burden on the revenue and general fund.
Yes, I mean, I can reassure you that that is done. All of my teams are always making sure that we're capitalising wherever appropriate. There's strict rules around what we can capitalise, and we have to ensure that officer time that relates to bringing an asset into being actually qualifies as a capital expense. But yes, it's something that's high on everybody's agenda, certainly.
So we'll go back to the medium-term finance strategy, and I believe Councillor Von Viese's 3 recommendations at 5, 6, and 7.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So I'll read them out for the benefit of those who don't have them in front of them. Number 5, OSC welcomes the existing CTR scheme, as well as the recognition that council tax, despite these measures, essentially remains regressive. OSC recommends that they investigate the feasibility of further expanding and fine-tuning CTR rates and eligibility. Number 6, OSC suggests that the Cabinet deliver a report on the impact of changes to adult social care funding in the first year of the 3-year budget to consider savings achieved, what lessons could have been learned, and the impact on vulnerable groups and those with protected characteristics. And number 7, OSC notes the equalities impact assessment on fees and charges, which notes the negative impact on equality and diversity. OSC believes that the Cabinet should review whether all the increases, for example, the cost of burial, are necessary, even when they have a disproportionate effect on vulnerable groups and those with protected characteristics. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we better take each one in turn rather than a collective discussion. So, is there anything you wanted? Should we deal with the recommendation 5 first?
Yeah, so recommendation 5, council tax reduction scheme. I think we always look at the feasibility. I think, though, in terms of that, by further expanding it, there is a budget cost to it. And again, there would have to be an equal sort of savings around that. We do look at the council tax reduction scheme on an annual basis around that. So we will always look at where and how we can around it. I think given where we are at the moment, that actually we are not changing ours when so many other councils across the country are, actually means that we are probably one of the strongest in the country anyway. Around that, I'm never going to say we're the strongest, because there will always be somewhere you've never heard of that may have a better one than yours. But I think that it's going to be very hard to expand it in the current financial climate. And actually, if I could, I would. I really would, because I actually think that personally that supporting those people who cannot. But I think in the current financial climate, when you're looking at the comparator councils, like rowing back on theirs, the fact that we are making the commitment to not change ours is a positive step. It could be very easy for me to look at savings and say, let's take it from the council tax reduction scheme. But there is a political imperative from us not to do that, and for me to say, I'm not doing that because I don't think that's the right thing to do. It's not fair to do that. But at the same time, there is the need to know that we have to look at savings and efficiencies, and extending it would mean further savings and efficiencies, which could affect other vulnerable residents inadvertently around it. So we will always, I think, what I'm to look at it on an annual basis anyway, and we will always look at what we think is, and I will make that decision based on where I think we need to go. I think it's absolutely the right thing not to change it at the moment, and reduce it down.
Okay, Councillor News.
I suppose, I mean, it's just too woolly, as this is a recommendation on the budget. Presumably, it should be costed. I don't think you can. It just doesn't make sense as a budget recommendation, as far as I'm concerned, because it has to have a cost attached to it, which we can then say we can bear elsewhere. But at the moment, just saying that we'll try and be, I just investigate the feasibility of further expanding and fine tuning council tax reduction rates and eligibility. I mean, I suppose the question would be: are there, if you feel that is necessary, so what would be the amount of the sums? Who are you talking about that would need to be included that currently isn't? I think to make it sort of even a valid recommendation in a budget context, it would have to have that kind of detail.
You, Councillor Coyne.
I do agree with Councillor Nunes on here. I think that, a recommendation like this, which does have a direct impact on the budget and would have a direct impact on our council tax and collection rates potentially as well on that. I think in terms of the further expanding the eligibility, is there anyone you feel that is not eligible? Who is that? Because I'm not sure, because it's done based on income, and people on low income. Pensioners who are, there's statutory requirement, they don't pay anything, and we support that as well. We know we've got an ageing population, and that will extend within that. So I suppose I get the spirit of it. I absolutely understand the spirit of it and around it. I suppose where I'm coming from is, I don't know how much you would think that, we would have to budget for to increase that, and therefore then we would need to go away and look at, well, how would we meet that? And in terms of the eligibility, I think it does encompass many people around it. I think we are generous on this. So I suppose if there's any eligibility or any that you think we have missed, happy to take that on board as part of that and look at that anyway. But I'm not sure where that is. Yeah.
Tim.
Just three brief things. Firstly, so to give you the context, current scheme costs us about £26 million in lost council tax effectively. So we're very crudely making it 10% more generous. You'd be adding £2.6 million to our budget gaps. That's just to give you the context. In terms of increasing the scheme, I'm aware of, I think it's 15 London boroughs looking at reducing their schemes this year. So that is the current music across London. That's the context in which you would be thinking about making it more generous. 15 councils are looking at making it less generous, simply down to budget pressures. Thirdly, on a technical issue, we've already set our council tax base. I don't know whether we're allowed to set our council tax base again and revise it, but I'm not sure. I'm not aware that anyone's ever done it. I think the deadline is the end of this month. So if we were to do this, I'm fairly certain it wouldn't legally be possible to make a change to our CTRS scheme for the upcoming year. So it's probably a moot point at this point.
But we always love breaking rules.
I think, obviously, I think the spirit of these recommendations, as I said, I think it is there, and I think if we could work. Can I just have an ask, as obviously the cabinet member is someone who's taking this away to look at how we can build the recommendations in. When recommendations are being made that do have an impact on the budget, but the costings come with it. So when you're making a recommendation, that you do look at that costing around that, so that it then means that we can take that away and say, actually, if you're recommending, for example, 5% or 10%, we then know how much that is, and then we can come back and say, well, actually, to do that, we would need to find additional savings, and also maybe some recommendations of where those additional savings could be found. It does make, as it stands, I think Councillor Moores is right. It is a bit woolly on this, and it sort of says, fine tuning CTR rates and eligibility. That how long's a piece of string on that? It doesn't mean to say that I don't agree with the sentiment of it, because I do agree with the sentiment of it.
I'm being reminded by the clerk that all our decisions have to be, recommendations have to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. There we are. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yeah, the only point I wanted to make is just that this committee actually made a very similar recommendation last year. And just note that in the recommendation we made was OSC welcomes the existing council tax reduction scheme, as well as the recognition that council tax, despite these measures, essentially remains regressive. Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommends that Southwark investigate the feasibility of further expanding the council tax reduction rates and eligibility. It's very similar, if not verbatim, to what's in front of us. I don't know what's changed in the last year, and I wouldn't say it has. I think the cost of living has only got worse for people. It remains a regressive tax. There is an arbitrary cut-off that will push more people into experiencing the cost of council tax that are not already eligible to benefit from the CTR. There is a tangible benefit to supporting those people from the cost of for the cost of living. So I've just put it out there for the rest of the committee. This committee voted for this last year. I'd like to know why you think it didn't, why it was valid last year but not this year.
But if I may, perhaps Councillor Crine could say any measures that have been taken since last.
Yeah, so I would say that the recommendation was overview and Scrutiny Committee welcomes the existing council tax reduction scheme, as well as the recognition of council tax, despite these measures, essentially remains regressive. Overview and Scrutiny recommends that Southwark investigate the feasibility of expanding council tax ability. And I think our response was that the council is under statutory duty to consider whether it should make any substantial changes to its working age CTR scheme once every year. The council will discharge that duty once again this year, and the outcome of that review will appear in the council tax base report. We've already published that base report, and I think, as Tim said, we can't change that because that is a statutory requirement that you have to do prior to agreeing the council tax rate as part of the budget. Should the review lead the council to recommend changes to the CTR scheme, those changes and alternative options must be the subject of a public consultation. The public consultation is necessary. Expect that it will take place in the summer and early autumn. Any change to the scheme that may be decided upon cannot be implemented until April, following April and the start of the new tax year. I think what we looked at is, in terms of this year, is that we felt that, it was really important, and I felt it was really important that, nearly half of London councils and councils beyond London are making significant changes and reducing their scheme. I felt that it wasn't right for us in Southwark to do that. But I don't think at this moment, in terms of the budgetary constraints, we can actually extend it. So I think in terms of the actually not making any changes and keeping it as generous as it is the right decision at this time around that. I don't know. I would not want to have an impact on frontline services as a result of that, which initially it could do. And given, some of the real good points that have been brought out around the equality impacts need analysis, the impact, on your recommendation around social care. If I took more money, if I had to look at more savings, for example, in social care, what impact would that have on it as well? So I feel that, I actually think we should be and the first part of your recommendation about welcoming it, thank you for that. But I think the fact that we are committed this year to keeping it as it is when others are not, in itself is sort of, recommended. I do.
Well, that might be a recommendation, but Councillor Foster.
I think that I don't think the logic of what Councillor Chamberlain said holds really. I think, making a recommendation last year doesn't mean that we should make it this year.
It's 3-year budget.
Well, but the recommendation was to look into the feasibility of it, not to actually do the thing. But having recommended doesn't mean that we should also recommend it the following year. The fact that it's a 3-year budget is neither here nor there, because otherwise we would just have the same recommendations year on year. So we should look at it on its merits, not based on what we did last year. I think that it's kind of in line with what Councillor Newens has said in some of her contributions to things. It is, I think, a challenge for the committee in some ways to come up with really hard and fast recommendations about what should change. And I think that we fall a little bit in some of these into sort of gesturing at the things that we like and sort of slightly vaguer things like that. And this sort of this council tax reduction recommendation, even if we were to take it, doesn't necessarily entail anything changing, because of course the cabinet will say, well, we've looked into this and we don't believe it's feasible. They won't necessarily say that, but they could do based on what the recommendation is. So for in the interest of having more substantive recommendations, I don't think we should take that one. And I do think that the following two are better in that sense, because of understanding the impact of the changes that we're making in both cases on vulnerable groups, and that even where we don't make recommendations about particular budget lines that change or cuts that shouldn't happen, it is valuable for us and for Southwark at large to understand what the impacts of particular savings that we make are. So I do quite like the other two recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Councillor von Wiese.
Yeah, just to add, I completely hear you on the costing. We will obviously cost this in our alternative budget, which we will send out at the Assembly. Just to say that, you know, that again, it is about fine tuning, and it is about looking year on year, not to do exactly the same thing, but looking whether circumstances have changed in any way. We all agree, I think, that there is so much wrong with the whole scheme of council tax that we very much hope that government will, you know, change the system in its entirety. Maybe that could be a recommendation, for example, to get rid of the single occupant discount for, you know, people like me who could claim it, but to be honest, I don't need to, and others are desperately needing reduction schemes. So I think the fact that we had it last year doesn't mean we need to look at it on a recurrent basis, but I completely get that you've done that, and maybe it's too late now for this year. On the other two, obviously, this is about protecting people from the impact of cost savings, where we think we need to assess what the actual impact is, and in particular when it comes to adult social care, you know, cases where independence or independent living has led to a situation where actually the care, and this is a specific case I'm talking about, a friend of mine whose disabled son has been put into an independent sort of accommodation and just cannot cope at all. And so we would like to know, you know, what the impact is. And detail for number 7, we do know that things as the increased cost of burials has been hitting particular groups, community groups who are already more vulnerable, and particularly those with protected characteristics harder than others. Has that been taken into account? So that was generally the motivation behind those two.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
On recommendation 5, I mean, I'd go slightly further than Councillor Foster and suggest that the fact that we did it last year actually is a reason for not doing it this year, because if we did it last year and it's been done, then are we just asking officers to do the same thing all over again? And are we going to find anything different? So actually, I think the justification is reverse. We have to prove why we should do it again rather than why we should not do it again. I also have some reservations about number 7. I mean, I think I addressed this yesterday when I asked Councillor Cryan about the number of fees. I mean, again, I understand where Councillor von Wiese is coming from, but this does seem like a rather. The point I made yesterday was that there are an awful lot of fees, and if we're going to review all of them, then that's a lot of work. To go back to the point I made earlier, this might be one where a sample actually is an appropriate way of approaching this. So I think I mean, I might support something which picks out, and we did see, just to make one further point, we did see that the equalities assessment had been done yesterday. So I think if we're going to do a recommendation around this point, I think we have to identify why we think the equalities assessment that's already been done isn't good enough, and ask the cabinet to go and redo the equalities assessment, and perhaps do that on a much smaller number rather than the many hundreds of fees that we saw yesterday.
Yes.
Point of clarification, no, we actually refer to the equality impact assessment, which has already found that these charges have a negative impact on equality and diversity. We're asking the council to therefore do something about this unequal impact.
Okay, thank you for that.
Does therefore it need to be willing to focus entirely on the fees where the equality impact assessment has found a problem.
Thank you. Councillor Crane.
So we've already said, as we said last year and I said yesterday, this summer we are going to review the impact across all the equality impact needs analysis around that. So in many ways, I think you are pushing over. We're already going to be doing that. We've committed, and I've publicly committed we're going to do that. I think in terms of 6 and 7, I think they could be made into one recommendation, because it's every single ENA that's been done, but we are going to be looking at and reviewing the impact that's come out of the budget on that. So those, you've got a separate one for adult social care and one for those fees and charges that are outlined in the equality impact needs analysis. There are other equality impact needs analysis that will be reviewing things like social children's services and other things that have come out within other departments. So I wonder, rather than and I'm saying yes to this, by the way, I'm not saying we're not, because we are doing it, rather than having sort of separate ones on each individual one, whether you have one that encompasses a review on all of the equality impact needs analysis to assess the impact on all protected characteristics within the budget savings and efficiencies, because that will pick up both of those and more.
That seems a sensible suggestion.
So it incorporates both of yours, and it does a little bit more than that.
Yes, so long as we're looking at adult social care.
That will be part of it. It will be part of it. It's every single thing where there was. So last year's equality impact needs analysis that came out, we've already committed to this summer reviewing the impact of the budget in regards to that. That's a piece of work that's been undertaken this summer. So it will encapsulate those, especially savings the things that you've mentioned around adult social care, that will do more than just adult social care. But there will be a full report done on that. So it actually is sort of saying yes to what you're doing, but we're doing a little bit more than that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that? Yes. Everybody happy? Yeah. Did you want to speak?
If I may, Chair, just to first of all agree with Councillor Lehman and others in respect of recommendation 5 here, that I've moved that that this particular recommendation, based on the evidence presented by Councillor Cryan, that this is a review that was taking place last year, based upon what Councillor Chamberlain identified. It's very similar to the recommendation last year. It's been implemented. It may well arise next year, but I can see no reason for it to arrive this year. So my recommendation that this particular recommendation not be supported.
Okay, is that seconded? Do we need to go vote on that, or are you happy? I'm not happy, but do you accept what's been said?
I disagree with the consensus of the committee, but I can see that we're not going to win the vote, so there's no point pushing it.
No. Yeah. No. We moved on from that. We'd agreed that one. No. I'm okay. So we won't vote on it. We'll just it won't go forward now. Thank you. Is there anything else on the medium-term financial strategy anybody wants to raise? That's the chamber.
Chair, the impact of the national insurance rises on adult social care was an area that was referenced yesterday as being an area of concern. Given that we've committed to doing some lobbying already and encouraging council to lobby further, I think maybe there's merit in putting together a recommendation, a constructive recommendation there about actually calling on the government to go further in what it's doing on national insurance contributions to mitigate the impact it could have, particularly on social care workers. I think that's an area that's most vulnerable as a result of that rise.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did I recall you suggesting something along those lines yesterday?
Additional £2.8 million in the adult social care grant funding, of which the plan is to use that to offset those national insurance increases as well. I think we're also waiting just to see again on the final settlement what comes out with national insurance increases. Quite a few councils have fed back to the government that actually they may not cover the full amount, and so we're just waiting to hear what comes out of that as well. Around it as well, I think that it was based on HMRC figures based on revenue budgets, but obviously the HRA is not the general fund revenue budget. And there has been an acknowledgement, I think there's that, those councils with a large HRA, so mostly London councils and some district councils, they're looking at around that as well. I don't know what it's going to come out as, but I think there will be some changes. We wouldn't surprise me if there were some changes. Whether Southwark gets share of that and what that will be will come out on the first week of February. But based on the provisional settlement, we've already made that commitment on that additional 2.8 to help offset that. Because absolutely, I think, as I said yesterday, we're really acutely aware of that impact, and we do not want our care homes or our care providers to fail around that. Because their wages bills are too high, they support some very vulnerable residents, and we need to help support them to do that.
So it has been part of our submissions then.
Well, we've decided that we've got that additional amount, and I think certainly that's what we've said we will use that towards.
Right.
So I'm happy, in terms of recommendations, I think happy to look at whatever the wording would be around that. Yeah.
Do you want to?
I can have a go. Yeah. And again, I appreciate what you're saying, Steph. You did also just say that there's no guarantee it's going to cover all the costs, particularly when we're looking to look to recruit from the private sector. They're not that's not protected, and a lot of social care workers are working for agencies that are temporary contracts. So I think this is an area where we are going to see a direct impact on social care in Southwark as a result of the national insurance rise. But I get what I did. I wrote the quick drafting some. Sorry, let me just. So Oscar notes with concern the potential damage to Southwark Council's finances caused by the rise in employer contributions to national insurance. Oscar notes that the government mitigation funding will not cover the full additional cost to the council for directly employed staff, and further notes that there will be no mitigation from the government for the increased costs from contractors such as in social care. Oscar recommends that the council lobby central government to provide them further mitigation, particularly for social care.
Okay. Members clear what they recommend. Any discussion? Right on it. Agreed then? Agreed. Okay. Anything else on the medium term strategy? No? Okay. Anything else on the budget before we go?
No, I need to say thank you to this committee again, because I think, as I said before, I think this does strengthen our budget process around that. And I think that there's been some really good challenge around it. There's been some really good recommendations that have come out of this as well. So I just want to pass on my thanks for all the work that you do. I know it's a lot of work we give you, a lot of reading that we give you, and I'm always amazed at how in such a short period of time you absolutely digest it and challenge quite rightly where challenge is needed on it. So just my thanks to you all for this. As I said, it does strengthen the budget process in a way that I think benefits us as a council, but also benefits most fundamentally benefits our residents.
Yes, thank you, and vice versa. We recognise all the hard work that you put in and the officers in relation to compiling all these documents, and see we've always got questions. And thank you for answering those and the other cabinet members as well yesterday in that regard. Thank you. Right, you can leave now. Let's move on to item 5, which is the Scrutiny Improvement Review Implementation Update. We're going to hear from Everton Roberts as the head of Scrutiny on the actions arising from the Scrutiny Improvement Review that have been taken to date or are in the process of being implemented. Sorry for the lateness of this item. Has it been circulated by email? Okay. Wait till every member's received a copy. Yes, sorry.
We did at our last meeting, well, not last meeting, but the meeting before last, say that reports that are not received within a week's notice be tabled. This is a 15-page report that, we're expected to digest. It doesn't feel like a particularly good way to run a scrutiny review.
I think we'll take that on board and note it. I want to allow Everton the opportunity just to brief us verbally on board, and I think we ought to put on the next consideration. But I still think we ought to just hear what Everton's got to say. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies to members for the lateness of this item. The intention is for a further updated report to be presented to the February BOSS meeting. Members are being asked to note the progress on the implementation of the agreement, and in particular, the draft Cabinet Scrutiny Protocol, set out on pages 8 to 13 of this document, and the extract of the Scrutiny Recommendations Action Tracker, pages 14 and 15 of this document, which we used to track progress on the implementation of asking Commission recommendations. So this is not recommendations from the Scrutiny Improvement Review. This is recommendations that the Commission and OSC are moving, and so we've now got a tool that we can use to track our impact on the council's initiatives. So OSC agreed the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny Improvement Review recommendations in October 2023, along with an agreed set of actions for which there were over 100. As with other council initiatives and services, the implementation of the Scrutiny Improvement Review has been subject to an external audit by the council's external auditors, BDO. Key findings from that audit were that the actual action plan that had been produced needed to be revised to enable better manipulation of the data and the quality and analysis in terms of the deadlines for recommendations and whether or not they're being met or missed, along with proof and evidence that whatever's been written down is actually implemented, that there's evidence to support that. The BDO also recommended that in acknowledging the number of actions that had come out of the Scrutiny Improvement Review, that where actions were either not achievable or unclear, that we should undertake a process of reviewing those actions to see whether or not they need to be deleted or revised. I will be undertaking an exercise in consultation with the chair in time for the next meeting to anything identified being agreed again by us. BDO also recommended that OSCE receives a regular update on progress so that it maintains oversight. And what they suggested is a quarterly review. So this report and the actual action plan, which has been produced but is not really in a state for public consumption yet, formatting issues have made that certain lines are in place. So it will go to the February OSCE and then again to the first meeting of OSCE in June or July. And the intention or the expectation is that there will be significant progress on implementation of the scrutiny improvement review recommendations. So in terms of the actual recommendations which were put forward by the scrutiny improvement review set out in the report are those actual recommendations. This is minus the actual individual actions which were called out and put into the actual action plan. So I won't go through the whole report, but I just wanted to draw your attention to some issues. One is around strengthening collaborative relationships between scrutiny, cabinet and the directors, whilst maintaining the independence of scrutiny. As mentioned earlier, a cabinet scrutiny protocol has been drafted to shape and inform that process, along with shaping, informing and directing the actual future work programming of the scrutiny, with a view to scrutiny being informed of council priorities and initiatives, there being more dialogue between cabinet members and scrutiny chairs, and a two-way process, so scrutiny keeping cabinet members and senior officers informed of scrutiny activities. So what I'd ask members to do is to have a review of the cabinet scrutiny protocol with a view to coming back to the next meeting in February with thoughts and suggestions on how they feel it would be need changing if that's necessary. Protocol is subject to cabinet member consultation still. It has been presented to CMT, and what you have in front of you is the outcome of that presentation. There will be processes underpinning the actual cabinet scrutiny protocol, such as support for the meetings between cabinet members and scrutiny chairs, a greater clarification on how cabinet will inform scrutiny of issues that are coming through the system that they need to be made aware of. So that's one thing I want to draw your attention to. A few other areas. Paragraph 18 around mapping of opportunities for community engagement. Members may recall at the November meeting, they received a presentation from Jessica Leach, Community Engagement Manager, about how we can better involve the public in the work of scrutiny. So we're currently discussing with the community engagement team what they can do to assist scrutiny in supporting the work of the scrutiny function and conveying that to the public. There's a new council website, a council platform called Engage Southwark. Our intention is to hold a scrutiny page on that website informing the public of the work of scrutiny, and also including a page where the public can put forward suggestions for scrutiny. There will obviously be a kind of a review process in deciding which matters go forward. In terms of timescales for this, we're hoping to have that page up and running by the end of February, beginning of March. The purpose for that is one of the things we're trying to get into place is earlier engagement with cabinet and senior officers around the work programs for the upcoming year. At the moment, Scrutiny agrees its work programme at its first meeting, and it doesn't really leave enough time for cabinet and senior officers to input in the process. By starting the process earlier, it will enable us to engage earlier with cabinet members and senior officers and get their input into proposed scrutiny topics for review, along with a clearer scoping of those issues so that we can identify what's required for the year moving forward. That would be something for members to agree to, but that's a suggestion, and that was outlined in the scrutiny. Pre-decision scrutiny, that's included in the cabinet scrutiny protocol, and with a view to there being greater involvement of scrutiny in pre-decision scrutiny. What is to be established still is exactly how that will take place, be it numbers of pre-decision scrutiny, like an agreement in advance that there will be 2 pre-decision scrutinies per commission or OSC. So that's still to be discussed, or what the triggers will be for pre-decision scrutiny. But that is in the cabinet scrutiny protocol with the intention of that being progressed. Paragraph 35, use of pre-meetings to prepare for scrutiny review sessions. Now, we have introduced scrutiny pre-meetings. Some of the meetings are more successful than others. What I anticipate with greater scoping and key lines of inquiry in the beginning of the process earlier, that we will be a lot more clearer on what's needed in advance, so we can line up officers and cabinet members a lot better and be clear on what we're asking of them. And that is it, Chair, unless you've got
Thanks. Thank you very much. I don't really want to open it up because obviously it's going to come back to our next meeting. We know the comments and the points that you referred this to. I mean, the only thing I want to say is obviously it doesn't come quick enough as far as I'm concerned, considering we've been working on this as far as 3 to 4 years, and I'm quite keen to get this implemented 100%. I think your comments in relation to the community, I mean, our education reps are here, and perhaps that's something that they might want to come back with certain ideas or recommendations on how we can involve the wider community more. But I'm hoping members, when we do meet again, to consider this item, that also give full input how we enact some of these recommendations. So thank you, Everton, for coming and staying out this evening. And if nothing else, thank you all for coming along and for all your contributions this evening. Wish you a safe trip home. Thank you very much.